The first time I saw this guy, I was glad to see someone else sharing information on the issues that this country is experiencing, because we can't fix problems unless we're willing to acknowledge that they exist. So spreading awareness is important, and there's lots of news that I simply don't have time to cover. But then I noticed that he's a con artist and alarmist with zero journalistic integrity, so it became a bad thing instead. Especially when there's big names endorsing him, like Ann Coulter, Paul Joseph Watson, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Ingraham from Fox News, and if his courting efforts pay off, maybe even Fox News itself soon enough. Yeah, they really have a reason to care about you being suspended from PayPal. Good luck there, buddy.
Peter Sweden here. Is a civil war imminent in Sweden?
I see it as a problem that this video has over 100,000 views and a majority of likes. Because in this 10-minute long coke addict confession, the bastard love child of Dracula and Porky the Pig rambles on about how maybe, just maybe, there might be a civil war in Sweden. Of course, he's clear that these are just speculations, but then again, he does spend the remainder of the video planting disaster scenarios in your head and really trying to push for a narrative of doom and destruction. Keep in mind that this is the same guy that became a refugee thanks to homeschooling, seeking asylum in the UK. Oh, so you're a migrant child? Why the fuck would you need homeschooling, dude? You're like 22 years old. Home university, bro. Got my PhD from my mama. You flee a country because of war and persecution that might end up with you dying or in prison. You don't flee a country because you're a fucking creationist who thinks that the earth is 6,000 years old. At this point, you sound like an Islamist more than anything. Oh, and apparently Pepsi uses aborted babies for flavoring. Wow.
You look like you've been eating babies yourself, you Dracula-looking motherfucker.
Yeah, I really want to get my news from you, bruh. He also wants to make it sound like he escaped Sweden due to political persecution, when in actuality, it's because the family company that he's involved in owes 7 million crowns in debt, because they don't like to pay their taxes. Mass immigration clearly isn't good for the economy. But neither are you.
All the leaders for the three biggest political parties in Sweden have recently talked about war. Jimmy Åkesson, the leader for the nationalist Swedish Democrat Party in Sweden, which is the third biggest party in Sweden right now, said that, quote, a war is being waged on Swedish society. Also on the same day, Ulf Kristersson said that people are running around shooting people and running around with hand grenades as if there was a war in Sweden. And then we also have the Prime Minister of Sweden, for the biggest party, the Socialist Party, which are in government currently. He was actually talking about considering deploying the military into no-go zones, into these suburbs, to get rid of the criminal gang violence in Sweden. Now this only comes a couple of days after the Swedish government sends out the leaflets to 4.7 million households in Sweden, warning them what to do in case of a terrorist attack or what to do in case of war. And this is really strange. The Swedish government is sending out leaflets warning Swedes to prepare for war.
First of all, Jimmy Åkesson was speaking metaphorically in terms of people experiencing uncertainty and feeling unsafe. He is not talking about a literal war. He is talking about an unacceptable increase in crime, and he also declared a war on organized crime. These are metaphors. The moderate party leader Ulf Kristersson said that criminals are running around with hand grenades as if it were war, meaning it's a fucking expression. It's not actual war.
And I'm just speculating here, but
and what Jimmy Åkesson said about deploying military in ghettos was in case of riots, and because it's simply more effective given the police lack of resources. It's not because Sweden is Iraq. We're talking about simple assistance here. Åkesson even draws parallels to Denmark, and that's hardly a war zone. And just look at these armored police vehicles in America. Look at that shit! Is anyone calling the United States a war zone? I think not. As for the issue with the pamphlet, this is what the head of the National Security Department had to say to the media. We are preparing for the attack of another government. Then you read a bit further down. By the end of 2015, the Swedish government decided that 50 departments should take up planning a total defense of society. Reason for this decision was the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So Peter Sweden takes anti-Russia fear propaganda and spins it around into, oh, immigrants! Yeah, that's not dishonest at all, is it? But of course, this isn't the first time he's done it. He actually has quite a rich history of wild exaggerations. Catastrophe ensues. This is the country formerly known as Sweden. Then McDonald's themselves pop up and say, yeah, that's a commercial flyer that was sent out in particular neighborhoods where there's many newly arrived migrants. And the other side of that paper you're holding is in Swedish. So if Peter Sweden would have had the mental capacity to turn a flyer, he wouldn't be pulling the Islamization narrative. Then again, it wouldn't surprise me if he did read both sides of the flyer and just decided that whatever doesn't give him YouTube clicks isn't interesting. And what's really annoying to me is that there is actual Islamization taking place in parts of this country. When Sharia police start showing up in ghettos, scolding women for walking their dogs or not being covered up enough, that's a very serious issue. This is just capitalism. Of course, a corporation wants new customers, no matter what country they're from. This is hardly something new that only McDonald's does. In the Middle East, they got English translations too, because it's just smart business. And nobody is whining about Americanization there. You can criticize McDonald's for it if you want, but that's not really the narrative that Peter is putting on this, now is it? As a Swede, how am I supposed to know what the coupons mean? I don't understand this. Sad faces. Turn the page around, you cocknob! Being a public figure is hard. Being a conservative public figure is even harder. You cannot believe how much abuse and hatred we get for simply reporting truth. Well, apparently being truthful is even harder. The Swedish government is giving tax money to fund an Antifa group. A Swedish far-left group called Jag är här are trying to silence free speech, mass reporting those they disagree with. Basically, they are Antifa. Why is the Swedish government funding Antifa? They're not Antifa, you pale chode, white mongrel chode, diet milk chode, gluten-free chode. Jag är här is a network of annoying leftists. That is true. But it's like 40-year-old women posting cliches on social media and reporting stuff here and there. It's not militant, far-left, rock-throwing hooligans. This is no different than calling everyone you disagree with Hitler. And speaking of Hitler, Peter is a fan. In July of 2017, he met with Katie Hopkins. They were both in Sicily to promote the Defend Europe project, where they sabotage migrant boats. A year prior to this, Peter was denying the Holocaust on Twitter, blaming the Jews for everything, and saying that Hitler made some good points. Which I guess he did. Autobahn was a good idea. Volkswagen was a good idea. A car that every man can afford. Anti-smoking campaigns long before smoking was recognized as hazardous to your health. That was also a very good idea. Although I don't think that's what Peter means when he talks about good points. Especially when looking over all of these tweets about Jews. Anyway, when he was caught, he blamed these opinions on being young and dumb, saying that he has changed his mind since then. Which is completely possible. Everyone can evolve. But what makes it seem like a cop-out is blaming it on your youth, because you don't go from young and dumb to old and wise in a year. And if you really stop denying the Holocaust, why don't you make a video about it? I mean, I would really like to see what piece of evidence made you stop believing in the Holocaust, and what new piece of evidence you discovered that made you disregard the former and changed your mind. I mean, that shouldn't be very hard to do, right? If you have a genuine evolution and process to share. That's the least you can do if you're honest. Especially when there's so much misinformation and propaganda and lies being spread about the Holocaust in these online circles of yours. But instead, he's just making videos about immigrants with these ridiculous thumbnails that look like they were made in paint. Seriously, how fucking hard is it to not look like a 70s porno? And what's up with the bad acting? This is not a natural pose. I can tell you spent 10 minutes taking selfies of yourself thinking, how can I make my face embody the basic human emotion of pain? And look at this shit. I like to call this one Luke Skywalker in the Third Reich. Because this is on some I am your father type bullshit. No! Look at this thumbnail. Oh, so now you care about the Jews, huh? First of all, the red lettering really shows what I'm trying to get across here. This is a call to panic. Second of all, the fact that he felt that this was an appropriate pose for a thumbnail about arson shows that he really is devoid of human emotion. He is truly struggling to grasp the concept of empathy, in this case for Jews. He just doesn't know where to go with this. In his attempt to illustrate sadness, he instead embodies a man witnessing goatsy for the first time in his life. If you don't know what goatsy is, I really think you should Google it. And make sure to click the Encyclopedia Dramatica page on it, because everyone else is pussies. As I'm sure you can imagine, all that doomsday imagery Peter Sweden is doing leads to comments like this. Sweden is already dead. We're just watching it twitch. Yeah, we have less crime than America, and we're dead. Right. We even have less crime than Canada. Canada. How's that crime rate in Mexico looking, Jorge? Are you feeling proud of your shithole country, Mr. Gonzalez? Your country is heading for a civil war against the communist left. Yeah, because hipsters have guns. And if all this wasn't bad enough, Peter manages to go full retard.
Basically, what they have to do is deploy the military and clear out these no-go zones by force. I mean, that's the only solution that I can see to this problem in Sweden. The Swedish Prime Minister has now suggested it, and the thing is, the problem is, if they do this, if they deploy the military into these no-go zones, these criminals are not going to give up freely. They're not just going to give up freely, no. These guys have RPGs, grenade launchers, hand grenades, automatic machine guns, AK-47s. These guys are heavily armed, they're not going to give up willingly.
But you mentioned one grenade launcher, and I quote, "It was discovered in a paper factory by a metal detector. We think it got in via the wood chipper. It was not loaded with a grenade. The object was concluded harmless, and it is now being destroyed." That's what the news article said. But you think all of a sudden that, oh, the immigrants are having weapons! Oh, fuck! Oh! We're under attack! We know it! We're breaking the conditioning! They have weapons!
A grenade launcher was found inside there. I mean, how many of these weapons caches are there in Sweden? With grenade launchers, RPGs, I mean, they're just missing tanks and fighter jets now to have a complete army. What is going on here in Sweden? Are these criminal gangs in these no-go zones? Are they building up caches of weapons? Are they building up for something? I don't know. But it's really interesting stuff happening in Sweden, and I'm just speculating here.
Oh, that's not fear-mongering at all. No, just add "I don't know" to the end of your sentence, and everyone will forget that you just talked about immigrants having a fucking army. It just erases everything you said. And yeah, the cops did find one rocket launcher in the woods, and this one was loaded. Nobody got hurt. I don't feel worried. How do you take a few high-power guns and then make it sound like all immigrants have these guns? But it's true that they have AK-47s, some of these gangs do, and they have pistols and MAC-10s. And if they would bring these weapons up and fire them at the military, they would be shot so fast and so hard, it would send them into a time loop where they end up becoming unborn, and their mom's asshole starts bleeding. I don't know if you've noticed this, but desert jigaboos can't aim for shit. That's why the majority of those grenade attacks aren't fatal. That's why the majority of shootings aren't fatal. You think these jack-off Arabs are Navy SEALs? They're junkies that grew up watching Scarface. They're not a threat against our military. I bet you they can't even run a mile because they got such shitty cardio. What Peter here fails to realize, and what most people who never visit ghettos fail to realize, is that most immigrants are fine. They're not criminals. The ones doing all of this crime in the ghettos are like small friendship circles of like 15 people. We're talking youth gangs of young adults. It's not the larger part of a neighborhood. In fact, most immigrants in the ghetto love the police. They're flat out asking for more police. They want order in their communities. They don't want their car to be set on fire by some shitty brat. I have a friend who lives in a ghetto, and I go to visit from time to time, and he told me how one evening a criminal was getting arrested by the cops on his lawn. All the immigrants in the neighborhood gathered around to point and laugh. because they think criminals are pathetic. They don't want Sweden to turn to shit, and they don't want their neighborhood to turn to shit. They're sick of gangs ruining it for everyone else.
Imagine what will happen if they put in the military against these criminal gangs. I mean, a mini civil war would break out between the criminal gangs and the Swedish army if they did this, because they were not going to give. I mean, they're not going to give up easily. So is that why they sent out these leaflets warning people what to do in case of war? Is that the real reason?
Are you serious? There's not gonna be a civil war between cops and doped up losers just because the police are doing their job. It's not happening in America, and it's not gonna happen here. So Peter Sweden is seriously suggesting that 20 meth heads are gonna start a civil war. Fuck off!
So I'm just speculating.
Well, you're just speculating. Well, then you can say just about any crazy shit, right? Throughout this entire video, this guy's mannerisms, it's like listening to someone who did way too much coke, and now they're trying to spin you a story to get you to borrow them money. That's the level of desperation that this guy is on. It genuinely looks like he knows he's full of shit, and he's putting on an act to sound more scared than he actually is. The idea of a civil war is highly unlikely, because our military and police are properly trained and highly competent and completely capable of defending this country from a minority of Islamists or criminal gangs. But of course, there's a loud bunch of assholes on the internet who want Sweden to fail because they're white nationalists who, ironically, hate white people. The comments I get from certain alt-righters on my videos are absolutely fucking disgusting. They really wallow in our issues and try to exploit them to push their narrative. They want things to be worse than they actually are, because otherwise they can't radicalize people and fool them into blaming the Jews. Stop being pussies and kill all these fuckers. Hitler was right. We all have to admit to this. This is why disgruntled white supremacists kill people. You can bet your ass I delete that shit and block anyone stupid enough to type it. You see, Nazis have always jacked off to the idea of a holy race war to end them all. Looking so far back as to the 70s with the book The Turner Diaries, the idea of a race war is appealing because it allows white nationalists to simply purge out all perceived enemies of their race. Quick and fast, so they don't have to deal with the patience required for democracy. But you can't do that unless you can radicalize an army via fear-mongering first. That's why the alt-right talk so much about Sweden. It's not because they care about our well-being. No, they think that we deserve it because we voted for it, even though the population has been brainwashed by the media and don't even know what they're voting for at all. But whatever, right? They want Sweden to go to hell so they can use it as a warning example to try and argue for a racially pure ethno-state. So, fuck them. Then we have the champagne socialists who don't have any principles whatsoever. They're just mindless puppets going against whatever the far right has to say. If the far right endorsed ice cream, the left would push to boycott it. If the far right embraced transsexuals, the left would shun them. So they want to act like Sweden is perfect, and if you disagree with them, they will accuse you of being a Russian agent. Which is pretty interesting, because if you wanted to destabilize a country, wouldn't it make more sense to promote open borders from third world countries instead of pushing against the policy that is destroying our country? Both of these extremes are morons. None of them seem to realize that there's actual human lives at stake here. And both exaggerations are damaging. One side doesn't want to admit that problems exist, and you can't fix problems without acknowledging them. The other side admits the problems, and then some, exaggerating them to the point where it becomes ridiculous and nobody can take it seriously. 22 shot and 6 killed in Chicago this weekend. And Peter Sweden says, Chicago sounds like America's Sweden. In 2017, there were 320 shootings in all of Sweden. Out of these, 42 people were fatally wounded. In the city of Chicago alone, that same year, there were almost 3,000 shootings and 650 murders. One city in America has worse violence than this entire country put together. Tenfold. And you're comparing Chicago to Sweden? Talk about a loss of perspective. Thus far this year, 309 people have been shot in Chicago. So 2 months in Chicago is worse than 1 year in Sweden. And keep this in mind. Chicago has a population of 2.7 million. That's not even a third of Sweden. Baltimore has a population of 621,000 and they had 343 murders in 1 year. Bear in mind, I was talking about shootings specifically earlier. In 2016, there were 106 deaths in Sweden either through murder, shootings, manslaughter, or assault and battery. In 2017, it was a little over 110 people according to Aftonbladet. Still less than any of these two cities. If we're looking at reported murders, then we're talking around a number of 300. But reported murders is not the same as established cases of lethal violence, because there has to be a police investigation and autopsy. Therefore, they rarely rely on reports to reflect reality. Some of these numbers are suicides even. In either case, it's pretty absurd seeing Americans talking about how bad my country is when they don't even bother checking the stats on their own. Clearly, you're just trying to distract yourselves from your own failure. Crime is a complex issue. It's not as simple as without immigration there would be none. Yeah, obviously immigration does increase crime, but can we please keep two separate thoughts in here at once? I would rather spend a night in a Swedish ghetto than spend a day in Compton. But here's the thing. Chicago isn't being used as an example of a socialist utopia. That's what pisses me off about the good image with Sweden. I'm living in a country where young cancer patients are dying because hospital lines are too long. That's not a utopia. We have serious issues that need fixing. Simultaneously, Sweden isn't Africa. Sweden isn't worse than America. Their healthcare system is also shit, but over there, people aren't dying due to a lack of resources. People are dying because some capitalist full retard fanboy decided that human rights should only apply to people rich enough to buy insurance. Nobody is peddling the right narrative here, which is this. Swedish politicians took a good country and started turning it more and more shit for each year. If it continues in this same direction, then it is gonna be a disaster. Right now, it can still be turned around easily. The real disaster is that there are very simple solutions to our problems. The journalists and politicians are just too cowardly and politically correct to lobby for them and enforce them. Close the borders for at least 10 years. Accept 0 asylum applications. Make it mandatory to deport all criminal immigrants, even those who have been given citizenships in the past 5 years. Just revoke their fucking citizenship and send them back if they insist on acting like shit. Since many of them are economical migrants, give them, say, 500,000 to return home. It's much cheaper than having them here in Sweden for the rest of their life, but it will basically make them rich in their shithole country. Revoke all welfare benefits for migrants. Access to welfare systems should only be available for Swedish citizens. No free healthcare or welfare checks for illegals. This will kill all incentives for people to come here to begin with, because asylum applications take months to process anyway. Last but not least, do like Norway and release the statistics on immigration and crime so that people understand why we are doing all of this. If we implemented these ideas, many of our problems would solve by themselves. What people don't understand is that the solutions are really simple. They're basic and concrete. But that's not the battle. The battle is fighting through a pussy tsunami of middle-class assholes who are too afraid to get ostracized, so they don't even say shit. They just go to work, pay their taxes, fund this insanity, and then fool themselves into thinking that they've done something good for society by keeping their fucking mouth shut. The culture war is the true battle. Politicians are never gonna have the balls to enforce these ideas unless there's a backdrop of broad social attitudes willing to support them. And I don't want people to watch this asshole and become hopeless, because that really doesn't help my country. The only ones benefiting from your hopelessness is the political elite. Painting up this image of doom is defeating to our cause. Do not swallow the black pill. Now let me tell you a little story about patriotism. First, Peter wants to move to Norway because of how nationalist they are. Then, Peter moves to Norway because of how oppressive and anti-nationalist the UK is. Then, Peter complains that nationalist Norway wants to draft him into the army. I really don't like the idea of having to die for a country. But that's because I live in Sweden. If I lived in a country actually worth defending, I might have a different opinion. 2 years in the army is a very small price to pay for a country that isn't trying to rape itself. And in addition to this, he has the gall to post what happened to the brave Englishmen of 70 years ago. Men who bravely stormed beaches on D-Day and willingly ran into a hail of Nazi gunfire. Today, they mass panic and cause a stampede in Oxford Circus over literally nothing. Years of liberalism has turned people into pussies. Then he writes this post about how his hand hurts from holding on to a hot frying pan for a few seconds. Someone tells him to run cold water over it, and Peter replies, "But then my hand would hurt from the freezing water." I can definitely see why you don't want to be in the military, and maybe you shouldn't talk about masculinity. I'm just saying. Also, considering how you made that post about how the Orlando massacre was divine intervention, don't you think it's kind of hypocritical of you to talk about civil war in Sweden? I mean, 49 people got killed at one nightclub, and that's not war. But when Abdullah runs around with a hand grenade and misses a police car, that's social collapse. Shouldn't you kind of reconsider your measurements there, Captain Sweden? Oh, man, this is real. You're actually watching this. He's trying to guilt trip people into giving him money, because otherwise he has to get a job at a restaurant. And out of 9,000 people, 76% decided, fuck off. And I agree with those people. Now let's just hope that everyone who endorses this fake news alarmist finds the courage to draw that conclusion themselves. Oh, he also doesn't believe in vaccines, which is ironic because that gives him a lot in common with African migrants. Somalis don't believe in vaccines either, and that's why measles is a thing here. Fucking measles, because of Somalis and Peter Sweden. Also, let's not forget that yoga is satanic. And it's a religion. I'm pretty sure it's not a religion. Oh, and by the way, I found him on checkav.com because apparently Peter Sweden likes to do Czech porn, where he bangs gross old Slavic women in the woods. Nah, I'm just kidding. That was an example of some actual fake news and the level of Peter's journalism. So if you think that was stupid of me, pay attention to Peter's Twitter page.